The Galactic Council's proclamation echoed across every human-occupied world. Earth was unworthy of existence. Archaic, primitive, backward. Those were the words they used to justify war. Their forces descended from the void, confident that wiping humanity from history would be as effortless as brushing dust from a polished table. Captain Jack Slater stood in the remains of Forward Operating Base Raven, staring at the smoking ruins of the command center. His radio emitted nothing but static. Hours ago, that frequency had been filled with the voices of commanders issuing desperate orders, calling for regroup, for retreat, for anything that could turn the tide against the onslaught. Now silence. "Damn bastards hit hard," muttered Gunnery Sergeant Travis, Tex Dalton, his grizzled features illuminated by the flickering embers of a nearby transport. "We didn't even get a chance to scratch their armor." The others gathered around, each bearing the weight of an impossible situation. Corporal Mike Reynolds had his rifle slung over his back, his uniform streaked with dust and dried blood. He was a man who could jury-rig an explosive out of kitchen supplies, but today he had nothing to work with. Private First Class Jake "Rookie" Carter, the youngest among them, held his side where a piece of shrapnel had torn through his vest. The pain didn't show on his face, just the raw determination of a soldier who refused to fall before the fight was over. Lieutenant Ryan Briggs, their last remaining communications officer, shook his head. "All major command centers are gone. New York, D.C., Houston. Radio chatter just cut off mid-transmission. If anyone's still out there, they're not talking." Jack exhaled, forcing his mind to stay clear. The battle had been one-sided from the beginning. The aliens had landed with towering mechs that shrugged off gunfire, troops in energy-resistant armor, and weapons that disintegrated anything they touched. Humanity had thrown everything at them: tanks, jets, missiles. It hadn't mattered. The Galactic Council had evolved past kinetic warfare, past combustion-based engines, and chemically propelled projectiles. In their arrogance, they saw humanity's weapons as nothing more than relics of a barbaric past. Jack clenched his jaw. That arrogance is going to cost them. Tex snorted. "Unless you got a plasma cannon stuffed somewhere I don't know about. We're fresh out of options, Cap." "Not yet," Jack replied. His gaze settled on a half-buried signpost at the far end of the ruined base, barely visible through the smoke. The words were faded, worn by time, but still legible. U.S. Military History Museum, 2 miles. Mike followed his stare and frowned. "You thinking what I think you're thinking? Got any better ideas?" Jack started walking, and the others fell in behind him. The museum stood at the edge of a broken landscape, its once pristine entrance marred by fallen debris and shattered glass. Inside, beneath layers of dust and years of neglect, the ghosts of past wars waited in silence. Rows of antique rifles lined cracked display cases, flanked by rusting artillery pieces and outdated combat gear. Aircraft from wars long past hung from the ceiling, their wings casting jagged shadows in the dim emergency lighting. But Jack wasn't looking at any of that. His eyes locked onto the metal beast resting in the center of the exhibit hall, a World War II-era M4 Sherman tank, its olive-green frame still bearing the faded white star of the U.S. Army. Tex let out a low whistle. "Now there's a beauty. Damn near indestructible for its time." Mike ran a hand along its surface. Time being the key word. "This thing's over a century old. Even if we could get it running, what's it gonna do against those mechs?" Jack rapped his knuckles against the thick steel plating. "Survive. They haven't fought anything like this before." Briggs frowned. They shrugged off 120mm sabot rounds like they were spitballs. "What makes you think this relic is any different?" They shrugged off modern weapons because they knew what to expect. Jack countered. "Our tech relies on guidance systems, heat signatures, electronics. All of that can be jammed, overridden, or disabled. But this," he patted the tank's hull. "No computers, no fancy sensors. Just metal, firepower, and brute force." Tex grinned, already running his hands over the tank's exterior like a man greeting an old friend. You give me a few hours, I'll make her purr. Mike's expression shifted from skepticism to interest. We could reinforce the shells. I saw a wrecked APC on the way in. Might be able to salvage some plating, boost the penetration. Rookie, who had been silent until now, took a step forward. I think I know where we can find fuel. The old maintenance depot, about half a mile back. I saw some sealed barrels when we were running from the last strike. Briggs sighed, rubbing his temples. We're really doing this, huh? Fighting a war with a museum piece. Jack turned to face them, eyes hard. We've got nothing left. No reinforcements. No air support. No backup. But this. He gestured to the tank. This is something they don't expect. They think we're finished because we don't fight like them. His voice hardened. So let's not fight like them. No one argued. Tex got to work, disappearing into the inner workings of the Sherman, like a man possessed. Mike and Rookie set off to scavenge fuel and parts. Jack and Briggs secured the perimeter, knowing it was only a matter of time before the enemy picked up their trail. Hours passed, the sounds of labor replacing the silence of defeat. Metal screeched, tools clanked, sweat mixed with the dust of old wars. And then, as the first hint of dawn touched the ruined cityscape, the beast roared to life. The engine's deep growl sent vibrations through the floor, shaking loose decades of dust from the museum's rafters. Rookie grinned despite himself, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Tex wiped his hands on his uniform and leaned against the turret. Gentlemen, say hello to Miss Liberty. Jack climbed onto the hull, resting a hand on the main gun. Now let's see if she can still pick a fight. A distant explosion rumbled through the city, followed by the shriek of alien engines. They had been found. Jack turned to his men. Mount up. Tex slid into the driver's seat. Mike took position at the loader station, and Rookie settled in next to the shells. Briggs climbed onto the hull, rifle slung, ready to provide cover. Jack secured himself inside the commander's hatch and looked out at the ruined world beyond. The Galactic Council thought humanity was broken, that they had seen the extent of what Earth's warriors could do. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Tex wiped his grease-streaked hands on his fatigues, stepping back as the Sherman's engine rumbled with raw, mechanical defiance. The tank sat like a beast waking from hibernation, its once-dormant systems surging to life beneath the hands of men who refused to accept defeat. The Galactic Council had shattered modern warfare, but they hadn't accounted for something that didn't rely on circuits or code, something that couldn't be shut down remotely or crippled by electromagnetic pulses. The old war machine was awake, and that meant they still had a fighting chance. Jack stood beside the turret, eyes fixed on the city beyond the museum's shattered windows. The alien patrols were closing in. Each distant explosion marked another district falling under the weight of their advance. Time was slipping away. We're moving out, he ordered, voice firm. Tex, get her rolling. Mike, what's the status on our rounds? Mike wiped sweat from his forehead, crouched beside the pile of salvaged shells. Scrounged up about a dozen functional ones, but they're standard issue from the 40s. We'll be lucky if they dent anything. Jack considered that, then turned to Rookie, who had been silent, watching the distant enemy movements with barely contained tension. You said you saw an old depot back there? Yes, sir, Rookie confirmed. There were a few crates marked experimental munitions. Looked intact. Could be something we can use. Jack didn't hesitate. Briggs, take Rookie and check it out. If we're gonna fight, we need everything we can get. Briggs nodded, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. Rookie followed, sprinting into the shadows of the ruined streets. The engine roared as Tex tested the movement, rolling the Sherman forward a few feet. The treads crushed shattered pavement beneath their weight, the steel hull rattling but holding firm. Mike ran a hand along the main cannon. Armor's thick, but their plasma will melt through if they get a clear shot. We're gonna have to keep moving. Use cover. Jack nodded. That's assuming they don't figure out how to adapt. They won't, Tex said, confidence unshaken. They think war's about tech, about who's got the fanciest weapons. They don't know what it's like to fight with something that doesn't think for you. He patted the side of the Sherman. This baby doesn't need a targeting system or an AI. She just needs men who know how to fight. Jack knew Tex was right. The Galactic Council had never faced resistance from a species that thrived in adversity. Their empire had been built on overwhelming technological superiority, on subjugating worlds that fell in line the moment their fleets darkened the skies. They weren't prepared for a war that couldn't be fought on their terms. Briggs and Rookie returned 20 minutes later, hauling 2 heavy crates between them. Rookie dropped his end with a grunt, prying open the first box to reveal thick, cylindrical shells lined with warning labels and faded ink. Mike picked one up, turning it in his hands. Armor-piercing, designed for Cold War-era tanks to punch through Soviet steel. A slow grin spread across his face. This might just work. Jack gestured toward the tank. Load him up. With practiced efficiency, they stocked the Sherman, securing every shell in its proper place. Rookie climbed inside, settling beside the loader's seat, while Briggs took position next to the turret. Jack climbed onto the hull and turned his gaze toward the city. Alien searchlights swept across the ruined skyline, moving with cold precision. The ground trembled beneath the weight of their war machines. "Time to move," he said. Tex grinned, gripping the controls. "Hope they're ready to get their asses kicked by a museum piece." The Sherman surged forward, rolling out into the streets as the first alien patrol spotted them. Plasma bolts streaked through the air, hammering against the surrounding buildings, but the tank plowed ahead, unfazed by the incoming fire. The first enemy walker, a towering bipedal machine bristling with energy weapons, pivoted, preparing to fire. Jack barked the order. "Mike, put one in its chest." The main gun fired with a deafening crack, the armor-piercing shell screaming through the air before slamming into the mech's core. The explosion ripped through its frame, sending molten metal cascading in all directions. The Galactic Council's arrogance had cost them. They had designed their machines to counter high-tech weaponry, but they had never planned for something as simple and as brutally effective as solid steel fired at impossible speeds. Briggs scanned the horizon. More incoming. Fast. Jack weighed their options. They couldn't fight them all head-on, not yet. "Tex, take us through the industrial zone. We'll use the structures for cover." The tank veered left, tearing through debris as the city loomed ahead. Alien troops descended from drop ships, their weapons glowing with energy, but the Sherman didn't slow. Mike took out a second mech with another well-placed shot, while Rookie tossed a grenade out the hatch, catching a squad of enemy foot soldiers in the blast. Tex wove through the streets, keeping their profile low, but the enemy wasn't giving up. Drones zipped overhead, scanning for targets, and the distant whine of anti-armor weapons signaled the arrival of more heavily armed units. Jack knew they couldn't keep running. They had proven the Sherman could fight, but now they had to make that fact heard. They needed to send a message. He pointed toward the towering silhouette of an alien supply convoy in the distance. "We take that out. We cripple their front line." Tex smirked. "Now you're speaking my language." The Sherman accelerated, tearing through barricades as the enemy realized what was happening. Plasma fire rained down, but the tank held strong, its reinforced armor shrugging off glancing blows. Mike lined up the shot, exhaling slowly. "Good night, you alien sons of bitches." The cannon fired. The shell tore through the lead transport, igniting the volatile fuel reserves within. The explosion ripped through the convoy, sending fire and twisted metal into the air. Secondary blasts rocked the ground as ammunition stores detonated in a chain reaction. The remaining alien forces faltered, caught off guard by the sheer brutality of the attack. For the first time since the invasion began, they weren't the ones dictating the battle. Jack watched the flames rise, listening to the distant cries of the enemy as chaos consumed them. They had expected Earth to crumble. Instead, they had just learned that humans didn't die easy. Tex let out a low chuckle. Think they're still laughing at our primitive weapons? Briggs smirked. Not anymore. Jack's expression hardened. Then let's make sure they never do again. The Sherman rolled forward, and the hunt began. Smoke billowed from the wreckage of the destroyed convoy, thick and acrid, rising like a funeral pyre into the sky. The fires painted the ruined streets in an eerie glow, casting flickering shadows over the crumbling buildings. Jack kept his eyes on the horizon, scanning for movement. The enemy wasn't retreating. They were regrouping. Tex maneuvered the Sherman over shattered pavement, the steel treads grinding against the debris. The engine rumbled, steady and defiant. They had made their stand, but the fight wasn't over. The Galactic Council had underestimated them once, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. Briggs adjusted his rifle, perched on the turret's edge. They're going to come down on us hard after that stunt. Mike loaded another shell, his hands moving with methodical precision. Good. Let him. We're not done proving a point. Jack smirked at that, but his focus remained on their next move. The Sherman had surprised the enemy, but now they needed to capitalize on that advantage. If they let the aliens take control of the battlefield again, they were dead men rolling. Rookie peered through the periscope, his voice tight with urgency. Contact. 2 blocks out. More walkers. Bigger ones this time. Jack's jaw tightened. The mechs they had fought before were nothing compared to what was coming. These were siege-class war machines, their armored frames bristling with heavy weapons, built for total annihilation. Tex exhaled sharply. Well, hell, that's new. Jack didn't hesitate. We go for the legs. Take out their mobility first. Mike nodded, setting up the first shot. The tank rocked as the main gun fired, the shell streaking through the air before slamming into the nearest mech's knee joint. The impact sent shock waves through its frame, and for a moment, the massive machine wobbled before crashing onto its side, crushing alien troops beneath its bulk. The other walkers adjusted their approach, shifting into a defensive formation. Plasma bolts tore through the air, searing into the buildings around them, melting steel and concrete alike. Tex swerved the Sherman into cover, narrowly avoiding a blast that sent molten debris raining onto the street. Briggs ducked as a shard of overheated metal sliced past him. They're learning. Jack gritted his teeth. Not fast enough. Rookie swung the turret, lining up another shot. The Sherman's cannon barked, sending another shell straight into the cockpit of a second mech. The explosion gutted its core, sending pieces of its pilot scattering in all directions. The remaining war machines hesitated, recalculating their approach. Tex took the opportunity to push forward, weaving through the ruins. The Sherman wasn't built for speed, but against an enemy that relied on precision targeting, unpredictability was their greatest weapon. Plasma blasts scorched the ground behind them, but none found their mark. Mike reloaded, breathing hard. We can't keep this up forever. Jack already knew that. Their shells were running low, and every engagement drained their limited resources. The enemy had numbers, technology, and air superiority. The only thing keeping them in the fight was the one advantage no alien force could replicate. Asterisk, asterisk, adaptability, asterisk, asterisk. Briggs wiped sweat from his brow. We need a real target. Something that'll hurt him bad. Jack considered their options. The enemy's ground forces were formidable, but they weren't the ones calling the shots. Somewhere above them, the command ships loomed, coordinating the invasion with cold efficiency. If they could cripple one of those, they wouldn't just buy time. They'd shift the entire war. His gaze settled on the towering structure rising in the distance. It was sleek, metallic, and distinctly alien. A command spire, the nerve center of their operations. Jack pointed. There. That's where we hit. Rookie's eyes widened. That's suicide. Tex grinned. Only if we screw it up. Mike slammed another shell into place. Then let's not. Tex gunned the engine, pushing the Sherman to its limits. The tank tore through abandoned barricades, its steel frame shuddering with each impact. The enemy realized their intent too late. The walkers adjusted their formations, trying to cut them off, but the Sherman didn't stop. Briggs opened fire from the turret, laying down covering fire as Tex weaved through the incoming assault. Rookie tossed a grenade at a group of advancing troops, the blast sending alien bodies flying. Plasma rounds peppered the tank's hull, but the reinforced armor held. The command spire loomed closer, its surface pulsing with energy. Defensive turrets lined its exterior, swiveling to meet the approaching threat. Tex pushed harder, every muscle tensed as he maneuvered through the storm of incoming fire. Jack knew they wouldn't make it inside, but they didn't need to. "Mike," he said, voice steady, "load the last armor-piercing round." Mike's hands moved quickly, locking the shell into place. "Ready." Jack exhaled. "Take the shot." The cannon fired. The shell streaked through the air, finding its mark at the base of the spire. The explosion tore through the structure's support systems, igniting a chain reaction within. The once impenetrable tower shuddered violently before collapsing in on itself, its upper levels consumed by fire. The impact sent a shockwave through the battlefield. The alien forces faltered, their communications severed, their command network in disarray. The precision that had defined their assault shattered in an instant. Tex let out a whoop, slamming his fist against the controls. "Now that's a damn war cry." Briggs grinned, watching the chaos unfold. They didn't see that coming. Jack allowed himself a brief nod of satisfaction before snapping back into focus. "We're not out yet. Regroup and find cover before they recover." The tank rumbled forward, disappearing into the smoke as the enemy scrambled to pick up the pieces. The Galactic Council had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest. Now they were fighting to survive. The Sherman rumbled through the wreckage, its treads grinding over the smoldering remains of what had once been an alien command spire. Smoke billowed skyward, twisting into the darkened sky, and the once coordinated movements of the enemy forces had turned into a frantic scramble. The battlefield belonged to no one now, just a wasteland of shattered technology and burning wreckage. Jack wiped soot from his face, his eyes locked onto the distant flashes of movement. The enemy was reeling, but they weren't beaten. Not yet. Tex kept one hand on the controls, the other tapping an unlit cigarette against the dashboard. "They're pissed," he muttered. "You can feel it. Like a kicked hornet's nest." Briggs peered through his rifle scope, scanning the ruins. "They're pulling back, but not running. They're regrouping." Mike slammed another shell into place, muscles tense. "Means we hit him again before they figure out their next move." Jack knew they couldn't afford to stop. The destruction of the spire had thrown the enemy into disarray, but it wouldn't last forever. The Galactic Council had ruled through overwhelming force for centuries, and they weren't about to let one battle shake their grip without retaliation. If they wanted to end this, they had to push forward. Rookie adjusted his headset, listening intently. His face paled. "Commander, I'm picking up something on the emergency frequencies. High-orbit movement. Something big." Jack didn't need to ask. He already knew what was coming. A retaliatory strike. The kind that left nothing standing. Tex clenched his jaw. "They're gonna glass the damn city." Mike exhaled sharply. "Cowards. They can't beat us on the ground, so they'll just wipe everything out." Briggs didn't take his eyes off the horizon. "Then we don't give him the chance." Jack made his decision in an instant. "We take the fight to them. Hit their landing zones. If they're calling in an orbital strike, they'll need to clear out their own forces first. That buys us time." Tex revved the engine, pushing the Sherman into motion. "Then let's make regret coming here in the first place." They tore through the ruins, weaving between crumbling skyscrapers and twisted steel. The streets were littered with abandoned alien vehicles, some still smoldering from previous engagements. The enemy had overextended, assuming victory was inevitable. Now they were paying for that mistake. Rookie tracked their route, pointing to a clearing ahead. "Their main landing zone is just past that intersection. If we take out their dropships, they won't be able to pull back their forces before the strike." Jack nodded. "Then we take out the dropships." The enemy was waiting. As soon as the Sherman burst into the open, plasma fire rained down from elevated positions, forcing Tex to swerve hard. The tank's armor groaned under the assault, but it held. Briggs fired from the turret, picking off snipers as they scrambled to adjust their aim. Mike gritted his teeth. "We're down to 4 shells. Make him count." Jack scanned the battlefield, calculating. The dropships were parked in a loose formation, their crews frantically prepping for departure. If they could disable just one in the right spot, The chain reaction would do the rest. He pointed. Mike, hit the fuel cells on the lead ship. Mike adjusted his aim, exhaling steadily. The Sherman's cannon roared, sending an armor-piercing round straight into the dropship's exposed fueling station. The resulting explosion engulfed the surrounding craft in a firestorm of alien metal and burning fuel. The shock wave knocked enemy soldiers off their feet, their formations breaking apart in panic. Briggs capitalized on the moment, laying down suppressing fire as Tex gunned the Sherman straight through the wreckage. Rookie hooped. That's one way to clear a landing zone. Jack didn't let himself celebrate. The battle wasn't won. Overhead, the sky darkened as something massive moved into position. The Galactic Council's warship had arrived. Tex glanced up, cursing. That thing's gonna turn this whole block into dust. Jack made the call. Then we don't give it a chance. Briggs reloaded his rifle, shaking his head. We're gonna fight a damn warship with a 70-year-old tank. Mike smirked, gripping the next shell. Damn right we are. The warship's underside glowed, energy collecting for the strike. The air crackled with tension, the weight of impending destruction pressing down on them. The Sherman rolled forward, its crew locked in place, unflinching. Jack's mind worked fast. They didn't need to destroy the ship. They just needed to disrupt the shot. He spotted a nearby comms tower, its structural supports weakened from the earlier bombardment. If they brought it down at the right angle, it would crash straight into the warship's targeting array. He pointed. Tex, get us to that tower. Mike, we're taking our last shot. Tex pushed the engine to its limits, weaving through the burning landscape as the warship's cannons adjusted their aim. Plasma blasts rained down, barely missing their mark. The Sherman reached the tower's base, its hull rattling from the force of impact. Jack grabbed the radio. Mike, put that shell right into the support beam. Mike nodded, jaw tight with focus. He adjusted the aim, taking a slow breath. The cannon fired. The shell struck true, detonating on impact. The weakened structure groaned, steel beams snapping under the weight. The tower collapsed, its wreckage plummeting straight onto the warship's exposed systems. The alien vessel trembled, its energy buildup destabilizing. For a brief second, it hung in place, struggling against its own failing power grid. Then, in a final, violent convulsion, it detonated. The explosion ripped through the sky, shattering the warship into burning fragments that rained down across the battlefield. The remaining alien forces, cut off from command, scattered in every direction. The invasion force had been broken. Silence followed, broken only by the distant crackle of fire and the faint, rhythmic thrum of the Sherman's idling engine. The crew sat still, absorbing what they had just done. The impossible had become reality. Tex let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. I can't believe that actually worked. Briggs exhaled, lowering his rifle. That's the kind of stupid that only humans pull off. Mike leaned back, grinning. They said our weapons were outdated. Guess history had something to say about that. Jack looked over the battlefield, watching as the last remnants of the enemy vanished into the distance. They had come expecting an easy conquest. Instead, they had learned the hard way that humanity didn't die easy. He rested a hand on the Sherman's turret, feeling the warm metal beneath his fingertips. This old war machine had been built in a different time, for a different war. But in the end, war hadn't changed. Jack turned to his crew, nodding. Let's go find out if there's anyone left to fight with. Tex shifted the tank into motion, the Sherman rolling forward once more, a relic of the past carving a path into the future.